When Jane Harper's debut novel, The Dry, came out in 2016, it was like a bomb had gone off in Australian fiction. Everyone was reading it, everyone was talking about it. That book seemed to usher in a whole new subgenre of crime fiction that we now call outback noir. And in the years since, every Australian small-town mystery was measured against this standard. It's been nearly a decade since The Dry was first published, and we've enjoyed 5 additional Harper novels, which includes her latest, numerous audiobooks, 2 film adaptations, and a miniseries. She is one of the top-selling crime writers anywhere in the world, and tonight we're here to discuss Last One Out, which transports us to a dwindling inland hamlet, threatened by an ever-expanding mine, where a mother searches for her missing son. Jane, thank you so much for joining us. So Last One Out is set in the town of Carralon Ridge, which for many of the long-term residents is remembered as a rural idyll. But change has come to Carralon Ridge and it's causing deep divisions in the community. So I thought we might start there. Can you describe the town as it was and then what it has become?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Charlotte, for that lovely introduction. And thank you all so much for having me here. I think I have to say, so I used to live in Geelong for until from 2008 to 2011. And I honestly, it was some of the best years of my life. And it's so lovely to be back here. And I often think, when I think back to my time here working on a Geelong Advertiser and the kind of conversations I had with people and the stories I covered and the way that this community kind of embraced me and kind of really made me feel like this was, somewhere I wanted to be and made it feel like a home to me. And I truly think if I had not had that experience here in Geelong, I really believe I could never have written the books in the way that I did, because I think being here just gave me such a wonderful insight and made me open my eyes to so many things that have later kind of led me to be able to put them into the fiction. So thank you so much to all of you collectively for just giving me such a great place to start writing from, really. So this book, Last One Out, is my 6th novel, and this one is set in a I do love an isolated kind of struggling community, and this one is another one of those. It's a community that was sort of really, really beloved by the people who live there. They sort of raise their children there and have beautiful kind of strong memories of the place, but it has become a shadow of its former self in sort of recent years when an industrial mine opened, some distance away, but essentially, it may as well be right next door for the impact that it's had. Shops have shut, jobs have disappeared, the schools closed, people have kind of left one by one. And to the point where we kind of join the story, this town is just kind of a skeletal remains, and it's sort of I guess it kind of focuses on the people who have stayed behind and what's kind of keeping them there.
I've heard you talk in previous interviews about some of the research trips that you've done for other novels, like you've gone to a coastal Tasmanian town for the survivors. And I wondered, did you take yourself to a dwindling town in the middle of nowhere with a mine next door and think, the next one's going to be in the Whitsundays?
That's right. I have to say the best research trip I think I ever did was for not this book, the last book, where I set it in the beautiful vineyards of South Australia, and that was a very...
Just had to do a research trip.
That's right, I did. I made sure I got all my tax receipts for that one. But I think it's quite interesting where, because the setting is such an important part of the stories for me, like it really is something I'm thinking about very, very early on in the process. And it's also quite interesting when I'm kind of developing the books, where kind of the inspiration comes from for the setting. So for this book, actually, the kind of the seed that eventually grew into the novel came at least, I would say, 5 years ago, possibly even a little bit more, when I read an article about a town that was going through basically exactly this kind of thing. And it was... it was, it would be beloved, and then it was kind of no longer really habitable. And they were speaking to residents who were kind of, really, it was very sad, like lamenting the loss of this community. And the thing that sort of struck me at the time was that all the things they'd loved, you could absolutely hear it in their voice, in what they were saying. But I was really left wondering why they were still there, because the things that they had loved about it clearly had gone and were never ever coming back. And that sort of struck me as interesting. And I wrote down at the time those kind of questions, and I wasn't quite sure at that point though what to do with that. And it then sort of later reminded me of an article that I'd written years earlier when I was working in England. And one of the papers I worked on had a really bad problem with coastal erosion in a certain area. And we'd gone out a few times to this kind of strip of houses that were just, had again once been so loved, and you could see like the wallpaper had been chosen, the kids' kind of height charts on the doors and things, and had just been abandoned. They were just being left to fall into the sea and just rot away. And it was so sad. And I think that those two things sort of melded together to eventually form the idea that kind of became the book.
Now, we will come to the premise in a moment, but just sticking with place, the research that you did for the survivors, you said you did a diving trip to kind of get the details that were filling in a structure that was already in place. And I found it interesting in terms of the point at which you do that research trip, because some might assume that that's the first thing that you do to get a sense of the landscape and then map out the plot. But you were talking in this other interview about how the research trip, taking yourself to this location, actually came almost last, because most of what you've already planned for the novel has been set in place before you need to answer the question of detail. So did you want to tell us a little bit about your research process and where things sort of fall into place with taking yourself to a visceral setting? Yeah,
I think it is really important to kind of try and immerse yourself, if you can, in the settings. I think it's it depends a little bit on your own process. If you're kind of writing your own novel, there's lots of different ways to do it. But the thing that I've found is that for me, there's a certain point where it does become really useful to kind of get out there and kind of get those sort of questions answered. I tend to do it, at the point where I've got like the first kind of draft, I think, completely kind of laid out, if not sort of fully written, and that's the point where I kind of can see the gaps in my knowledge, and I feel like that's a good time to sort of start working out what things do I need to know, but also what things maybe do I not know that are going to kind of could possibly impact the plot, because it's still early enough in the process to.
Have you ever had to go back and change something?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I think probably quite a few times, I would say. And I think that's why it's good to do it at that kind of fairly early stage, because, there is, you don't want to be sort of so far down the track that you cannot bear to delete it, or you just can't, like you actually can't change things and still have the book work. So it's good to do it at the point where you've still got a bit of flexibility, I think. But yeah, I've had to change quite a few things. I think there'd be lots of examples, but I mean, one that immediately comes to mind is when I was writing The Lost Man, which was my third book, and that was set in the outback Queensland. And I went out there with like a retired police officer kind of. It's funny because I got his contact with this guy who'd worked in Birdsville as a police officer, and I managed to sort of speak to him on the phone. I was kind of asking him questions, and I was sort of saying, I think I'm going to go out there and, and could you introduce me to some people? And he was like, do you have any experience outback driving the outback? And I was like, no. And he's like, do you know how to drive a four-wheel drive or dig one out of a pit? And I was like, no, I don't know. And then he said, you know what, I'm going out there and I said, I'll drive you. Because I think he thought at that point, if I don't drive this girl, I'm going to be rescuing her in 2 days' time. So I'm just going to, cut out in the middle and I'll take her myself. So, which was really kind of him. So he took me out there and I learned loads of things, but that was something where there were lots of things that I hadn't quite grasped until I was there. Like the big thing that I remember from purely plot-driven thing was I thought radio conversations could be private. I thought you could be on private channels, but every conversation is open to everybody, and that was something that I had to kind of rework some things in the plot to accommodate.
So the book centres around the disappearance of a young man, Sam, and his mother's relentless pursuit of answers in the years since. But it was no ordinary disappearance. So what makes Sam's vanishing unusual? The way that it's presented at the start of the book and on the blurb, it almost kind of reads like a bit of a logic puzzle.
I think so, yeah. So the book opens up, for those of you who haven't read it yet, it opens up the prologue where we see these kind of 3 abandoned houses, and it sort of sets up, it sort of sets this kind of sense of this town being somewhere that's largely, largely abandoned, really. And this young man is kind of going to visit these houses for reasons that are unknown at that point. And then the main sort of story opens up 5 years later, when we see his mother, a woman called Crowley, who is the main character in the book. And she raised her family in this town. She's not from there originally, but she married a man from there, and she's spent a lot of years there. She was a GP, so she's very much at the heart of the community. But since her son's disappearance on the night before his 21st birthday, her life has kind of echoed a little bit what's going on in town. Her marriage has collapsed. Her family structure is no longer what it was. She's left that community, and she now comes back every year on the anniversary of his disappearance. Not really, I felt, with her detective hat on. She's not kind of coming along to, try and crack this case wide open. She's coming really to sort of honour his memory, maybe to try and keep it alive, try and kind of make some sort of peace and resolution to questions just have no answers for her. So the book is, I also say with the books, for me, the mystery or the crime are kind of not really at the heart of the book. They're more the kind of launch point for what's going to happen and what we're going to explore in the book. And I think for me, the book was really about that kind of sense of grief and loss and unanswered questions.
As we've mentioned, there's 2 timelines in the book. There's the inciting incident of Sam's disappearance, and then there's the present day as well. And I've heard you speak in a couple of other interviews about how dual narratives are something you really enjoy writing, and you enjoy managing how 2 different timelines interlock, and have said that a single timeline for you, something that's just chronological, would be more difficult to manage than multiple timelines, which might be a surprise to some readers. And I wonder, what makes a dual narrative easier for you as a writer than something that is sequential?
So I think enjoy is a strong word to use there. I'm not sure. I do quite often have, yes, kind of a couple like 2 mysteries sort of, or like a kind of a present mystery and a bit of a past mystery, and I do that. Yes, I guess from the creative answer of that is that I quite enjoy it as a reader. Like I quite enjoy it when there's sort of a couple of things going on. The question is, are they connected? Are they separate? To what degree have they impacted each other, if at all? And so I just think it adds an extra kind of level of intrigue. Probably more practically, 35 chapters is a lot of chapters to fill, and you've got to find things to kind of keep the story moving and keep the reader wanting to turn the pages. And I think absolutely you can do it with kind of one mystery and one question to answer. But I think for me, it is a little bit. It gives you more material to work with when you've got, say, you've got like a secondary thing going on, because it gives the characters a bit more to talk about. It gives allows you to explore this question of whether things are linked, and if so, to what degree. So it just kind of gives you a bit of a hand with things like those cliffhangers and those kind of, the questions that are being posed both to the characters and the readers.
Returning to the community that we spend a lot of time with in this book, you alluded to it before, but they are faced with the expansion of this mine. And the central question at the book, in the heart of the book for them, is whether to sell up or to stay. And at first it may seem like a straightforward choice to the residents of the town, but as you sort of touched on briefly before, it's a layered and it's a complex and it's a heavy question, and it resonates differently for different characters. And so I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about what the weight of and the freight of that question, sell up and stay, why might it be so difficult?
Yeah, I think one thing that for anybody who might be writing their own book or just interested in the writing process, I think it's really important to consider when you're writing that different people react very differently to the same scenario. So you might have one situation which is black and white, and this has happened, and there's no arguing with that. This is the situation. But everybody brings themselves to that situation, and they bring their own background, their own financial situation, their own family connections, their own kind of, I guess, weight of like moral, what's important to them and what's less important. And so you've got to constantly be aware of what characters would naturally maybe think, and that will differ depending on what their background is. So this was a sort of a perfect example of that in the book, in that you've got the situation where the town, from quite far out, people can see that this town is going to be struggling, and it's not going to be able to go forward in the same way as it has been for several years, and it does for many years really. And the question that then is, to what degree do you sort of show the loyalty to the town, and do you maybe try and stick it out, hoping that you can kind of keep it together when there are financial offers on the table, and there is an incentive to kind of take that offer early because it may not be there later when you decide you really need it. And so that is causing a big sort of fracture between the community. There's also different, again, with ages as well. It's also quite important, I think, to consider the ages of your characters, because the other thing I found when I was kind of thinking about how these characters would respond was the way the sort of generational differences. So you've got kind of the older people who really remembered this community when it was at its best, and they loved it and they have really, really long, fond memories of it. And then you've got kind of the more middle-aged kind of bracket where they also have fond memories, but they have been personally impacted by what's happened. So they maybe have financially taken a hit, or they can see that the future's not there, or a job's gone, or so they have their experience is a little bit more mixed. And then you've got the younger generation who really have never seen this community at its best, and all they remember is it being quite boring and quite quiet, and they don't have that same sense of of connection with it that their parents or grandparents maybe do. So again, they're bringing themselves to what's happening.
There's a quote from the book that I feel really captures this, that's at the heart of the story, which goes, "The issue had become so black and white, so ingrained with a sense of honour, sell out or stay, that people felt they couldn't be honest with each other, and that was everyone's fault. Both those who had sold and those who had stayed. The divisions it created had caused trouble for them all." And so it's sort of like this, the history, or this idea of legacy and loyalty outweighing your possible future, because the future is not bright in Carralon Ridge.
And I think, if I could get literary for a moment, I think one of the things I really kind of wanted to represent with the town, and with also the family at the centre of the novel, was this sense that like the past is kind of holding people back, and you can treasure the past, and it can mean a lot to you. But at the same time, there maybe comes a point where it's more of a weight around your neck. And I feel a lot of the characters in the book, both the central family and also a lot of the sort of the surrounding neighbours and friends, are all kind of trying to, need to sort of shed this past and try and think of how they can kind of move forward while still being sorry about what has happened, and missing maybe what was once theirs. And I think it's important, especially in kind of books with a bit of like a little bit of a darker kind of crime or mystery element. I think it is important to have those elements of hope and light. So as a reader, I feel it's more enjoyable when you feel like there is a potential kind of happiness there waiting for at least some of the characters, if they can just take those steps to reach out and grab it.
There are layers of loss at play then. There's the loss of the town that they once knew, and there's also, on a personal level, the loss of Sam, the young man who goes missing, and the different ways in which it plays out for Ro, his mother, and Griff, his father, his sister. It's sort of a portrait of a family grieving in very different ways, and the ways that those kinds of grief can sometimes be misaligned. And so I wondered, I mean, how much do you think of Last One Out as more of an exploration of grief as a theme? Because it's so beautifully drawn.
Oh, thank you. I think, look, that was a really big kind of element of it. And I don't really, I never really go into books with a theme in mind. Like it's not, I'm quite plot driven when I'm planning. So the plot is sort of central for me, and then the characters come from that, and the setting also comes quite early in terms of what would support the plot. So it's very plot driven. I don't really come to the book thinking I really want to explore this theme, or I think it's really important to bring this out. I more let the themes emerge, trying to emerge naturally when I'm thinking about what is it that these characters are going through, and what kind of, what's keeping them awake at night, and what are they struggling with, and what is kind of playing on their mind day after day. And those hopefully are things that we kind of recognise in our own lives. They're things that hopefully we're maybe not going through, but we know from like newspapers or conversations, or just just living really. You see these things kind of playing out, and I think that's kind of the grief was a really big one. I mean, it's permeated her entire family, and they've all again responded in different ways. They've all kind of reacted to this same incident in different ways, which has in turn caused fractures between themselves.
Different and clashing ways at times, which is something that you often hear about collective grief, the range of emotions and reactions that a family, a town can have. In an interview about the survivors, because there is a grieving mother in the survivors as well, which is a central thread, you mentioned that setting obviously is a big part of your research, but so is psychology, and looking at human behaviour and whether it would resonate true to the reader. Did the psychology and the different ways that grief plays out form another part of the research for Last One Out?
Do you know, actually it didn't specifically for this one. For that one I know what you mean, what you're referring to the survivors, because that had a lot of kind of youth, young people going through a traumatic event, and for that I spoke to particularly someone very helpful from Beyond Blue, really helped me out with that novel. And for this one, to be honest, I actually just thought about what it would be like to go through such a terrible circumstance. I mean, I think there's certain things that like thankfully most of us will never have to experience, but we all kind of have these shared human emotions, and I think that's a really big thing. There's a really useful way, I think, to connect readers with the novel, regardless of what you're writing about, because most of us will never have the same experiences as the characters on the page. But there are certain emotions that we all recognise. So we all know what it's like to be, stressed at work, or feel underappreciated, or feel like we haven't got someone to turn to. And if that's worried about, your entire community collapsing, or if that's just kind of, your beloved book group or something, people moving away, we all experience things in a very similar way. And I think if you can tap into that emotion that is recognisable, that's a really good way for readers to kind of feel that connection, because I think there's certain things as well particularly in like books that sit on the crime shelf. There's a huge range of books that would sit on that shelf, and there's a big spectrum. And I think it's quite easy to make people feel sad and unsettled by just choosing something particularly horrible. Everybody in this room can think of something that is really very unpleasant and would make us feel a certain emotions when we're reading it. But I think that is a bit of a cheap shortcut, because I think the real connection with a book or the emotion comes from pulling out those moments that we recognise, and actually exploring people's reactions to something difficult, and trying to capture the trueness of that. And that's, I think, that's where the challenge lies in it.
With your characters, just sort of drawing that out a little bit more, I've heard you say that your characters are sometimes built for purpose, which I thought was a really interesting phrase. And that sometimes, particularly to aspiring writers or anyone working within fiction, that you kind of like to dispel the romantic myths around characters a little bit, at least within the context of your own process. And so what do you mean by built for purpose? And how does sort of the aspects of a full person, like traits, occupation, backstory, quirks, how do they emerge? How are they built?
Yeah, no, thank you that's a good question. Thank you for that, because I would say they're always built for purpose, because I think the characters, look, ideally by the time you read it, the book is completely finished and the characters feel real and developed and you feel like you recognise them and they're people that, feel like they belong in that story. But the fact is really that the characters are there to do a job in the same way as the language or the cliffhangers or the chapter breaks. They're all... they're functional at a purely kind of if you strip it all back, they need to do a job, and that job is to drive the story forward. So the characters are always so first I'm thinking about the plot, and then I'm thinking about what characters do I need to tell this story, and they've all got to kind of play a role, and they've all got to do certain things. So with the main characters, this is the first book where it's a female main character, and I get asked about that sometimes, about why have all the previous books been men, and the reason is the same as why this one is a female character for the first time as a main protagonist, and it's because they're the best person for the job, but it's because the main character does have to do certain things, so they have to have firstly, I think, a connection with the crime or the mystery, which can be tangential, but it has to be something that is going to be meaningful kind of at the end. They have to have, I think, a connection with the place, and that could be, it doesn't necessarily mean they've got a really long background there, but they have to have a reason for being there, and they have to have a reason to remain there for the duration of the book, like a really good reason. It can't just be that, the car's broken down, they just never get in the car and leave. They've got to really have a reason to be there, even when things get tough. Then they've also got to have excuses to have natural interactions with all the other characters. So they need to, whatever that is, they can't just run into people they don't know and start having conversations. They need to have either a background or some excuse to kind of have really chats that are going to help build the story. Like
Rowena's a GP, for example, so that would be an occupation where you would encounter people regularly across the broad spectrum of a community.
Exactly, yeah, and it gives her this kind of authority, I think, as well in the community, and it gives her like a reason to sort of care about the people, and so all those kind of building blocks go into making the person who they are, and then finally, I think they've got to be the person who is best placed to lead the reader through what's going to happen. So they have to have kind of a vested interest in finding out the truth, but obviously not necessarily in a police capacity. And so all those things come into play. And then I guess after they're in the main characters in place, you think about the secondary characters, and some of those will be more important than others. But the key with the secondary characters, I think, is to, when you're drafting the book or planning it, there will be obviously people who will become more important than others. But by the end, you've got to have those secondary characters on the same level, so it looks seamless, and people reading the book cannot really tell which of the secondary characters are going to prove to be more important than the others.
When you first said that phrase, or at least when I heard you first say that phrase, built for purpose, you were talking about everyone's favourite AFP agent, Aaron Falk. And it was in relation to Exiles, your previous novel, where you officially retired him from duty. When you sat down to write Last One Out, did you feel a sense of loss? Did you think, maybe I'll bring him back? Maybe he's not done yet?
No, I didn't.
Sorry, everyone.
I think, I think it was right. I felt when I was writing Exiles, like it was a third and final book with him in it, and that was at the time I spoke a lot about the reasons for that, being that he like I love writing about him. He has given me so much. He was there from chapter 1, page 1 of the first kind of, if you could even call it a draft of that book. And, he's changed my life, and, ultimately the man is a financial investigator, and there's a limit, I really honestly feel, to the number of bodies he can legitimately stumble over. And I just didn't want it to be, we all, again, without thinking too hard about it, you can all think of series, both, books, TVs, whatever, where it has just gone on too long, and clearly the ideas have run dry, and it's just, and I really did not want it to reach that point. So I felt like I wanted to kind of consciously go into writing that book knowing it was going to be the last one, really to allow myself to kind of put it all on the page and not feel like I had to hold anything back, just in case. So I'm sort of comfortable where he is now. I mean, I guess, look, you never say never. If I honestly had like a great idea that could only be told by him, absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to, I don't have enough ideas to chuck away any good ideas. So all will be considered. But I think it was really important to kind of tell that story well, to like allow it to kind of, all be there.
So you've written 3 of the Aaron Folks and then 3 standalone. And I wondered if, now having the experience across both a series and the one-off novel, do you feel sort of liberated by the structure of a one-off, or do you feel tempted to reintroduce a new lead who's perhaps not a financial investigator, but a beat cop? How do you feel about the differences with planning and writing a series versus a one-off?
So I really do like the one-offs. Like, I know a lot of people are not always, and I'm kind of among them, really like a series, because it does allow you to kind of delve deeper into the characters, and I absolutely understand that as a reader. I think though, the thing I really like about the standalones is it allows you to have this completely clean slate to work with, because I mean, like I was saying, I am quite plot driven, and the problem with a recurring character is that the book has to be built around them, really, and you've got constraints about where they are and who they are and what's happened in the past. Whereas with a standalone, I can kind of do it my favourite way, which is to think of the plot, build the characters, choose a setting, and it just gives me that real freedom to kind of tell the story and, tell the story kind of completely cleanly. And I have been asked, like, by the publishers, like, at various times, like, would there be another series? And I think I can see the merits in it. The only things now, though, going into it, knowing what I know, like knowing how, like, what it involves to kind of write I'm a big planner, and I know that if I were to do that, I would have to plan probably all the books out, and it's just like too much, frankly. Like, it just feels like a really big job to kind of think that as far ahead as I think I would need to do to feel comfortable.
Something I thought that was quite funny in an interview you gave about Exiles was that you realised at the end of the Aaron Folks series that you really should have given him more family members, or maybe a brother or sister or another parent or just someone.
Look, I can't regret a word of The Dry. It has, like I said, it changed my life. I'm so proud of that book. It's a joy of my life. But there were some things, like, if I had known that I was going to end up writing a whole lot of books, that I might have done differently. And one of them would have been probably to not make Aaron Folks such a kind of isolated, siloed character. I mean, look, if he had kind of a bit of a bit of few dodgy step siblings in the Wedding in the Wings, or
a couple of second cousins.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, an ex-wife maybe, something. I don't know. There would have been a lot of avenues I could have gone down, and I didn't go down any of them. So we are where we are. But yeah, and that's kind of, you live with the choices you make.
Something I'm really interested in is your reflections on the designation as crime writer, because I've noticed that you often refer to your books as mysteries and yourself as a mystery writer, which has a slightly different connotation. And in a couple of the reviews for your latest book, there were overtures of reaching beyond the categorization of crime into sort of contemporary fiction. And I wonder I've asked a few crime writers about this question, and they all seem to have surprising answers about their relationship to the subgenre of crime.
Yeah, no, so I actually don't read just as a side note, I actually don't read any reviews ever, so I would not be aware what you're referring to.
Good, but I'll take.
It's good to know. I actually probably do refer to yes, I probably tonight even have referred to the books as mysteries or the mystery at the heart of it. And I think it's probably splitting hairs really, because ultimately they all sit on the same, they all sit in the same section of the bookshop. I think for me, I tend to probably refer to more as mystery as crime purely because I don't have, sometimes I don't have like a detective in it, and I never kind of go down that road of the DNA samples or let's see what the lab has to say about this. Like it's more kind of that kind of police stuff. And even with The Dry, when, he was a detective, I kind of deliberately he has made this decision to make him a financial one because I didn't really want him to know what he was doing in that space. I wanted to be sort of competent, but like a fish out of water with it. So he wasn't kind of coming in and showing this dumb country cop how it's done. I wanted him to be very uncomfortable trying to kind of apply his professional skills to this situation. In a way where he didn't have, he's not going to have the lab sort of sweeping in with the answer. Because it is more about that emotion and the kind of the ripple effects of trauma on a community and a family and things. So I guess it's more the emotional side that interests me rather than strictly the kind of ins and outs of exactly who done it.
Procedural, because there's a central question at each of the novels. I would sort of classify the Aaron Falk ones more as crime because of his sort of insider perspective. But the others, they have a fulcrum of a question or a mystery at the centre. But they're portraits of families, communities, the effects of an event upon different generations.
And I think as well maybe look with I think at the end of any kind of crime or mystery novel you want the solution to be satisfying, but I think that can be satisfying in a way that doesn't necessarily result in this being kind of sort of black and white in a court of law. I think there's probably quite a few resolutions in my books where a decent defence lawyer would probably, get this tossed out if it came to court. And but I think justice can be found for the readers and the characters in knowing the truth. For the reader, it's enough. It's enough to know, and I think to see people get maybe what they deserve, both good and bad. And I think for the characters, it's enough. For the truth to come out, and I think that can be that itself can be the more satisfying bit than maybe thinking that everything has to be kind of absolutely watertight in a kind of modern legal sense.
So before you turned to fiction, you had a career as a journalist, and I read that you worked at the Geelong Advertiser for a while. So that's
I did for 3 proud years. Was it the Addy?
So how did your training as a journalist prepare you for a career as a novelist? Is it about asking the right questions or listening to dialogue? How did it prepare you?
Yeah, look, it's so much. I mean, I think I would sort of start this by saying, though, if you are trying to write a novel and if you're not a professional journalist or work in the writing space, it doesn't mean you can't write one. This is not sort of a prerequisite to actually then going on to write a book or anything. But it did help me a lot. And I think it helped me in so many ways. I mean, absolutely kind of the practical ways in that I was writing thousands of words a week. In a way that I was trained to do, which was quite sort of clear language and being aware that you're writing for an audience and being taught to kind of grab the interest early and hold it for as long as you can. And all those are skills that I developed over many years in newsrooms, some of the best ones spent here. And I think then it meant that when I kind of came to try and write this a novel, which I've been wanting to do for so many years and never ever done, but it meant that I was quite match fit for it. I was very used to sort of sitting at the computer and using the most of that time to write, to get words on the page. I was good at, I think I was quite good at listening to someone tell their story, or indeed imagining a story and thinking about what is it about this is going to interest someone who has not been through it themselves. that's something that kind of was really important in both the news writing and fiction. And then also, yes, things like the dialogue, again, kind of interviewing people. At the time, I was really good at shorthand as well, so I was quite good at kind of taking down quotes and then putting them in verbatim. And I think, sort of cherry picking those things that people say is really important in a news article, but in a book it's also really important because you have to have characters having natural conversations, and they're not going to be discussing things that are known to both parties. You've got to tell some things in other ways. So then when people are speaking, you've got to really think, what is that adding to the reader's experience? Like, it's got to be telling them something about how these people speak to each other. Is it with courtesy? Is it with anger? Is it real familiarity? Are they quite formal? Like, what is it? And that's going to tell the reader something. So it's about kind of picking out those bits that are going to add to the reader's knowledge and experience.
The dialogue, as you said, it's so natural in the books, particularly The Lost Man. I just loved listening to that. The dialogue between the characters on these remote outback stations and the way that they speak and relate to each other. And you've obviously honed that skill as a journalist, but now you're no longer working as a journalist. Are you a chronic eavesdropper instead?
I think I like to think we all are. Surely it's not just me. But yeah, I think it is important to try and get your ear in and listen to just how people do interact. And yes, like when I was out doing that sort of that outback research, they did speak to each other differently from how I used to speak to people when I was walking around the streets of Geelong. So it's funny though, because when I'm kind of writing the dialogue, everybody in the book sounds like me in my head. Like, they don't speak like me, but they all have my voice. And so then it's quite interesting when I hear the audio versions. And so far I've had a really great narrator. Steve Shanahan has done the first 5 books. He was also the voice of B1, Bananas in Pyjamas, for anybody with little fans of that. But he has a different voice as well, and that different voice is a beautiful kind of lovely Australian kind of authoritative tone that has done so well with the audiobooks. So he did the first 5 with the male narrators, and then Angeline Armstrong has done this latest one as a female narrator. And it's always so interesting to me to hear them do the voices, because it sounds so much better when it's not me saying these words.
If anyone hasn't listened to the audiobooks, you really must. And I was amazed to hear in an interview that he doesn't read the book before reading it for recording. He's doing it, or he said in the interview after I think it was The Lost Man, that he was just reading it as they were recording, and it was seamless. It was amazing.
It is. I think actually since he did that interview, I think he's actually has clarified. I think he was worried that it made it sound like he didn't prepare, which I think is absolutely opposite. Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's completely the opposite from how it sounds. I think he was more sort of capturing the spontaneity of him. So it doesn't sound like he's just reciting it. I think it was more about him kind of as an actor capturing the freshness of it. So he doesn't sort of labour over. He absolutely is. He's very prepared, and I think Steve Shanahan has done such a beautiful job with the audio. He's really. It's funny when I go to the States, like the number of questions I get about his audio, not so much his audio record, is more about what he looks like in real life. So he's got a very, very strong fan base over among, I would say, women American readers.
Now, we always have writers in the room at authors' talks, and they love to hear about process. So I did have a question about the art of the red herring, because your books are very skilled at misdirection, and we constantly think, we might have pinned who's done what in this one, but our expectations are always defied. And it reminded me of a line from Exiles that Aaron Falk says, which is, we see what we expect to see. So how much of an effective red herring comes from toying around with reader expectations? I think, look, it's quite it is quite a art, I guess, in terms of getting it right, because I think, the last thing you want to do is trick the readers. Nobody, like, I hate it. Like, nobody likes it when it gets to the end of the book and there's sort of a reveal, and look, it kind of makes sense, but it only makes sense if you really go back and look at that, one thing on page 180, and like, if you want it to feel fair, I think, is the key, but at the same time capture, ideally
capture sort of an element of surprise. And I think there are a few ways to kind of that help me do that. One is that I do always know the ending, so I'm always so it's always very clear to me sort of who done it and why and what has brought them to this point. I know who knows, who doesn't know, who is impacted by it, all those kind of things. Then being very clear on that, I think, allows me to think of ways to then slightly draw the attention to other areas. In terms of going back to what I was saying about the characters, so I know who did it, so then you need some other viable suspects, and that's what I'm talking about with the secondary characters. You need those viable suspects, and you need the people, who knew or who did it to also appear exactly as well formed as the people who didn't, but maybe could have. So you're trying to really. So look, knowing what happens is really key. I think another thing is to be aware that every chapter in the book should be there for a reason, and readers, I think, know that. Like, even if they're not kind of consciously thinking it while they're reading the book. For none of us, this is our first book we've ever read, so we're all aware that the chapters are there for some reason. So another way that I sort of find quite helpful is when there is it's quite clear to the reader what that chapter appears to be about. So something is happening, there's an important conversation going on, or they're seeing a particular piece of scenery that's kind of meaningful, or the character's kind of reflecting on something that's meaningful, and that very clearly appears to be what that chapter is doing to move the story forward. But within that chapter, something else will be mentioned that will seem incidental or throwaway or less important, but really that will be the thing that ends up being, important. So it's there, and you can look back and you can see it later, and you can't deny you were ever told, because you were. But ideally at the time, your focus is on something else. So there's quite a few of those throughout all the books, so you can have fun, go back and see if you can spot those.
Does all this pre-planning and plotting mean that your writer's room looks a little bit like a police headquarters with the whiteboards and the string connecting people?
Do you know, it doesn't, but I have actually sometimes thought I actually get asked that quite a lot, to the point where I wondered if I should mock one of these up just for the sort of the photo op. So, it sort of appears. But no, I'm actually not, I'm not a very visual person, actually. Like, I kind of, my entire kind of planning and everything is pretty much done on Word documents. Like, it is just kind of laid out the best chronological order I can. The gaps are kind of there to fill in. I go back and I'll just kind of continually refine it. I save every version, so I sort of feel like I think that's quite sort of psychologically important, because then I feel like, okay, I can just kind of tear into this as much as I need to. And if it's no good, the last version was still there. So, but it's all just, I don't do a lot of visual stuff. I don't have a lot of photos. I don't really do a lot of kind of visual planning or anything like that. To the point where I don't even really, when I'm writing, I don't kind of imagine, it's not like I'm watching a scene play out on, say, TV or something. And the way I sort of to see it is more as though I'm inside the character, looking through their eyes, and like, how am I feeling to this? What is going on now, and what is that making me feel? And then how am I going to respond to that feeling? Like, am I going to like throw a rock through the window? Am I going to storm out? Am I going to sit down and say nothing? And that sort of helps you kind of know the characters. But it's all very quite internal. To the point where, I couldn't draw you a lot of the houses and things in the book, but I could only just sort of describe them to you, if that makes sense.
We will throw to audience questions in a moment, but I did have a question about the dry, if we can bookend it with talking a little bit about the dry. That book really did seem to mark a new era in Australian crime fiction and Australian fiction in general. And I wondered, when you were writing it, did you have the sense of doing something really different, really new? Were you reading into that space and thinking, there is something missing here?
like, 100% not, absolutely not. Like I mean, when I was writing that book, I had I thought I was writing that entirely for myself as an exercise to see if I could actually finish a novel. There was no part of me that thought that book would get published. I had a kind of long-term plan that I was going to try and, so anybody sort of heard me ever speak about the dry, like I've done it in quite a few interviews, it talks about this unpublished manuscript prize that would happen every year, and I used that as a deadline to myself to sort of finish a manuscript to a point where I felt I could kind of enter it, and it was, and I kind of had this plan that I was going to do that 10 times. I was going to enter it, and then obviously nothing would happen, and so but I'd use what I'd learned from writing that book to write another book, and I would enter it again, and I would do that. And I thought if I did that 10 times, maybe, like surely by then, like I'd have learned enough that something would be viable.
Is that the 10,000 hours theory?
Yeah, maybe, yeah. I just thought like 10 times, that's quite a lot. Like, and if I've done it 10 times and nothing has happened, I mean, maybe I've given it a good go, and maybe I can probably walk away from it. So, but I really thought I could probably get it to a point where maybe, I could get something workable together surely by 10 times. But at that first time, no, like not at all. I mean, that was not, and it absolutely was not kind of sort of attempt to kind of fill a gap in the market. I didn't really know anything about the publishing industry. I didn't know any authors. I had no kind of foot in the door, and I was really just writing the kind of book that I thought I would like to read. I wanted to write it set in Australia, and I did like this kind of mystery element. And beyond that, I had no idea if these kind of books sold, or if I didn't really know that maybe there was a gap to be filled. And I think that's quite a good lesson, that again, for anybody who's writing their own book, in that you really can't predict what's going to capture the publisher's attention or the reader's kind of warmth and support. So you may as well just write something that you enjoy, because you can't control any of the factors beyond that.
Well, luckily for us, it only took one entry into that award, and here we are 6 books later. Does anyone at this juncture have a burning question? I will mention, please no spoilers, and there is a roaming mic. We've got a question at the back here.
It doesn't even have to be a burning question, just a regular question is fine as well.
Yeah.
Hi Jane, I was just wondering, did you have any input whatsoever into the screenplay and the casting on the dry? Were you consulted?
Did I have any input into the screenplay and the casting?
And the casting.
Kind of yes and no, in that contractually, when your book gets kind of picked up and optioned, those rights are kind of full, and they go to someone else. They go to someone else to the point that once that person has bought the rights, they have the right to on-sell it, for example. So the person you did the deal with, they could then sell it to someone completely different, and they would now own it. So it's like buying a house or something. They own that house. They can tear it down. They can sell it. They can repaint it, whatever they want. So it's taken me a little while, actually, I think, to come to a place where I feel like I sort of fully accept that. Like, it is quite hard, I think, to hand over your hard work, to someone else. And it's taken me a little while, I think, to reach that point where I feel like I fully accepted as someone else's creative work. And the best way to look at it, I heard Richard Osman talk about his adaptation of the Thursday Murder Club, and he said a couple of useful things I thought was, one, it's like having a grandchild rather than a child. You can enjoy it without having any responsibility for it. And the second was to see it as your work is completely intact. It is your work, and it always will be. Someone has been inspired by that work to create their own work, and that is their work. So there's always kind of, and I think that is a really healthy way to look at it, and I think that's where I am with it at the point. So just to give you some background on where that is. So no, they don't have to consult at all. Having said that, the Robert Connolly, who wrote the screenplay and directed both The Dry and Force of Nature, is a really, really lovely man, and he is very, he does consult with me, even though he doesn't have to if he doesn't want to, but he does. And so he would show me the screenplay, and he would ask me sort of things at certain times, but I let him I was happy to kind of let him do what he needs to do. Like, I trusted him to look after the book. I knew he liked the books, and I knew he wanted to make a good adaptation, which he did. The Eric Bana casting was quite, yes, well, yes, exactly. I think we all feel that way. I do remember him, so I met him for coffee, and he, in my memory, I remember him being a little bit nervous. He may remember things differently, but he said, he was saying, so we've got, look, this isn't going to work because you all know the end of this punchline to the story, but just imagine you don't. So you're sitting there, I'm having coffee, and he says, we've got someone, interested. I just wanted to see what you thought, because I have no veto. He knows that. We both know I can't say yes or no to this, but it's better for everybody if I'm on board. And he said, we think he'd be great. He's Australian. He's read the books. He's really keen. It's Eric Bana. And honestly, my jaw just dropped. And my initial kind of response was, I just thought, what an inspired choice. He's so kind of warm and beloved, and he's exactly the right person to kind of take people through the story. And I think it's been so beautiful to see the way that readers have kind of embraced him in that role.
Are we going to see Eric Bana in an Exiles adaptation?
Oh yeah, look, I mean, I would love that. I would hope so one day. I think, fingers crossed. I mean, the adaptations always take a really long time, and you've got to have everybody. I think it's really important for that one particularly that it would be the same team as well, because I think you've got such a great kind of setup with Robert Connolly is directing and then Eric Bana in the role. And all the kind of that made those films what they are, that you would need to have everybody available to do that. So I think that's sort of the question. But I think, it would be great. Like, fingers crossed, I'd love to see it happen.
We've got time for another audience question. Just down the front here, there's a mic coming to you.
Hey, Jane, I love your writing. The question I have, Lost Man, there is a connection between Lost Man and The Dry. Was that on purpose, or how did that come about?
Yeah, so there's a brief bit in Lost Man, which the eagle-eyed, you may have spotted, where there was a connection between the family in The Lost Man and the characters in The Dry, which sort of briefly touched on. And probably, I think, if you haven't read The Dry, you just kind of gloss over it as a bit of background family history. The reason for that actually was my mum, who is a big reader and quite opinionated, and she said, people love a series, Jane. They're gonna want a series. And I was saying, well, look, there's no place for him in this book. It's set in completely different space. There's a very small sort of family. I can't get him into this novel. She's like, well, people love a series. So I took my mum's advice, and I didn't take it entirely, obviously, but I thought, look, maybe she was right about this to a degree. So I kind of put in a little bit of a nod, just so it kind of existed in the same universe, I guess, for want of a better word. So that was how that came about.
I have a final question before we head over for book sales and signings. There was a TED Talk that you gave in 2018 on creativity and control. And in it, you asked the question as to whether we've been looking at creativity in the wrong way. And so I wondered, how do you cultivate your own creativity, and why might that be different to what we expect?
I think, so anybody who is interested in hearing me, sort of go into kind of writing process for 10 minutes, I was asked to kind of give this TEDx talk, and as part of that, they sort of give you this TED Talk coach, and they sort of say you've got to have a narrative, you've got to give people something really useful. So what are you going to give them? And I kind of came up with this idea about how I think creativity is often, from my point of view, kind of misconstrued as kind of lightning bolt of inspiration, and you're sort of waiting for this sort of this idea to strike, and the planets to align, and it will all kind of come together. And I gave this talk about how really there's a lot of sort of more kind of mundane drudgery involved in kind of getting something to work creatively. A lot of it is about consistency and about doing the kind of stuff that sounds quite boring, like plotting and working out where the gaps are and doing the research and all those things that come together to hopefully create something sort of beautiful in its entirety. and I think that sort of is evident in lots of ways. I mean, there's lots of examples of painters, like great painters, doing like practices, different versions of the ultimate masterpieces and things. And I think, so I guess that was just what I wanted to, and I still believe that what I kind of want to dispel again for anybody who's writing their own book, that it's not, don't feel sort of discouraged if you sort of, it hasn't kind of all come together in this kind of beautiful finished package. A lot of it is about just sort of showing up and doing a little bit, as often as you can, and allowing yourself to make the mistakes and refine it, and accept that some ideas don't always work out, and all those, bringing all those skills that a lot of you would have in your day jobs, like communication and meeting deadlines and expressing yourself clearly, and all kinds of things that a lot of us do in our everyday lives anyway. They are all skills that will help you in, particularly in writing. So, so it's not something that is only for a few. I think a lot of people have the skills that are necessary, and I just, writing has changed my life, and I just would love people who are interested in it to have that kind of confidence to go forward and just pursue it for themselves.
Thank you, Jane. Last one out is such an absorbing read. It is for crime readers, of course, but it is for lovers of general contemporary fiction as well, and Christmas is terrifyingly close. So we have Dimmick's Warm Ponds here. The lovely Julie will help you out, and we also have pre-signed copies from Jane if you have to dash off. But thank you so much for being here, and thank you to the Geelong Libraries. We hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Charlotte. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.